Hello and welcome to Expat Table Talk. My name is Jody Feagan, and I'm a partner at SX Expats and the Director of Women's Initiatives. And I'm joined today by one of our managing partners, Glenn Lawrence. Hello, Glenn.
Hello, Jody. Thank you. Yes, I'm Glenn Lawrence, the managing partner and a co-founder of SX Expats. I've been enjoying the expat life for over 20 years, first living in Mexico, where I met Jody and our other partner, Brett Holmes, as well as in South America and now in Spain. And we founded SX Expats with the mission of helping people to live life on their terms. And we're excited with our webinars to expand the ways we bring valuable content to our audience. So Jody, tell us a little bit more about your background and experience as an expat.
Yes, I lived as an expat in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico for 10 years, where I raised my 3 children. And this past year, I became a digital nomad, living and working in Italy, Spain, Greece, and New Orleans, which often feels like a foreign country. And it's where my first grandchild was born last year. I'm passionate about helping people live their best lives wherever in the world that may be. So if you're interested in moving to Mexico, this table talk today is for you. Glenn and I will be sharing our stories, and each of us offering 5 takeaways that could be helpful for you on your expat journey to Mexico. So Glenn, let's start with you. Why did you move to Mexico?
Well, we were primarily looking for a place to initially spend the summer for foreign language immersion for our young children. We also wanted to just broaden their horizons. I know that's a cliche, but it was appropriate then because we wanted them to experience life outside of their native country, which was the United States, and to get exposure to other cultures and so forth. So we had chosen a place in Mexico to spend the summer, but after the first week, I said, we're going to move here just because of the architecture, the climate, the culture, the people, both the locals in Mexico, especially the expats that we met very quickly. And it was just a marvelous place. And I thought it would just be a great place for us to move to as expats, not simply just to be spending summers there. How about you?
Similar story. Our children were little, 2, 4, and 6 at the time, and I was working on a board that helped bring the International Baccalaureate program to the public schools in Nashville, Tennessee, where we were living. And as I was doing research on the IB program, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a global educational program with a very strong emphasis on children learning a second language when they're very young and the benefits of that. And as I researched that more, I realized because the programs in Nashville, they were going to be bringing starting in high school, my children, wouldn't be getting that language exposure when they were really young. So I started looking at schools for them to do some summer programs, and I found one in San Miguel de Allende where they start at age 2. So we, decided to go down for the summer and give it a try. And the minute we drove into that city, I was mesmerized. I just fell in love with it right away. And after spending a couple of summers there, I realized too that they really needed more than just some summer programs, kind of summer programs where they were also in classes with kids that spoke English, so those were their friends. So I thought, let's do a full immersion for a year, and then it was 2, and then it was 3, and then we bought a house, and it was 10 years later.
Yeah, it's sort of a typical story. I remember the same thing, just driving in the first day, coming kind of down the hill, and all of a sudden there was the Central Plaza, the churches and the buildings, and yes, just captivated with that. I was just the other day, I was reading through some notes of a photographer friend of mine who had specialized for decades in black and white photography. And he had taken an extensive trip in Mexico with a guide. And from then on, he said he started photographing in color and never went back, just because the color in Mexico just so impressed him. It made such an impression on him. And that's the same thing. And it's just interesting that you were looking to take some incremental steps, but all of a sudden, bang, you just kind of embraced it and made the leap, just like we did. Okay.
But one of my recommendations would be to visit ahead of time if you can. That's we have that opportunity. That's what we got to do. We spent summers there. We learned the neighborhoods, found out about the schools, all of those things before we actually moved. And then when we looked, to make it more permanent, then we knew where we wanted to buy a house and things like that. So if you have that opportunity, visit ahead of time.
I think that's a really important piece of advice. We both know people that have come down there and made the plunge. We probably went faster than we were ever intending. And part of that as well is to make sure, this is going to be one of my takeaways, which is to do it for the right reasons. At SX Expats, we're all about living your best life, living life on your terms. We kind of call this your plan A lifestyle. Other people will talk about your plan B, escape plan. We're all about designing the best life you can live, because there are no do-overs here. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing to embrace something that's inspirational. But at the same time, we also know people who have maybe they had family relations problems, other relationship problems, and so forth, thinking maybe a change in venue might cure that. Well, we also know people that, they brought their problems with them. So we just caution people. We're all about helping people live their best lives on their terms, but we just want you to think through doing it for the right reasons. I think that just makes things more sustainable. And that's what we're all about, is people being able to sustain those lifestyle choices there. So Jody, I'm curious, we ended up meeting, first day of school for our kids in San Miguel. But did you think about any other countries? Because there are other Spanish language speaking countries that could also do education for kids. So I'm just curious kind of what your thought process was on choosing Mexico.
Well, originally I didn't choose Mexico, or I wasn't thinking about Mexico because I didn't speak a word of Spanish. But I did speak some French, and was kind of thinking, living in France would be nice, and and I'm sure that would be nice, except my husband at the time traveled quite a bit, and and came back and forth, and so we needed a place where he could have a base and be able to, in the United States, and then be able to travel back and forth to see us. And Mexico, made sense. That made it very easy. There were direct flights from several places, not into San Miguel, but into a couple cities that are close to San Miguel. Mm-hmm. And, so that's why we ended up choosing Mexico. And then when I found the school that took children at a young age, that's why we chose San Miguel originally. And then of course I just fell in love with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't really give a lot of consideration to other countries, only because we had traveled in Mexico. We were, like you, we were just looking for a few months to start with. And as you said, San Miguel is a fairly convenient place if you want to kind of, it's I don't call it a baby step, but it's a much smaller step than some of us have made later on, because I also had business obligations traveling back and forth between Mexico and the US. And San Miguel is a great place because you can drive within a day of the border. We know a lot of people that go back and forth that way as well. So it was a convenient place, language, culture. We just didn't need to look any farther, and made that. But I just wanted to echo something that you had said earlier. You talked a little bit about, trying it out. That's going to be another one of my takeaways, is kind of try before you buy. We know people that within a weekend have started contacting realtors. They're looking at houses. They're, placing bids, trying to negotiate. That's great. Love it when people fall in love with the place and act, but that's probably premature. We would suggest, rent someplace for 6 months, even a place like San Miguel, which is a medium-sized city. It's not small, but it's also not a huge city like Mexico City, but it does have individual neighborhoods. Expats live in different parts of town. It's really important to kind of get a feel for life there. So we would just strongly recommend trying before you buy. Just rent someplace and really get a feel for the city before you make the bigger commitment there.
Yeah. Now, another one of my takeaways is if you are looking to move with your family, think about doing it when your kids are really young. It just, first of all, it made it way easier for them to learn the language. And then we didn't have any pushback. They were just young and, they went where we said we were going. But living in San Miguel, there were several families that came and went from the schools where my kids went and your kids that they did it when their kids were older. And I think they saw a lot more challenges because of that. Kids leaving their friends or, just, having a harder time with the language, just things like that. So if you were thinking of moving to Mexico and you want to do it with your family, consider doing it when they're really young, because it will make things much easier.
Yeah, I second that. I wouldn't tell people not to go if their kids are older, but just know that might be more of a challenge because of the relationships they have established, schools and so forth. But also because when the kids are so young, they learn like a sponge. If you really are doing it, especially for them to become fluent in that language, that's just a great time to go. I know, after we had moved permanently and had started in school, for the first, couple of weeks, my kids were struggling a bit. But then we got, sort of a full-time babysitter nanny in the house who only spoke Spanish. And just within weeks, I'm sure you saw this too, just within weeks, that huge leap in their ability to speak Spanish. And that was exactly what we were looking for, that full immersion. And when they're young, that really is helpful to have those minds that just absorb and learn very quickly. So I think that's an important point, if possible, for someone to do that. Now, when you moved, did you get a long-term residency in advance? Did you move your furniture? Did you move your household? How did you handle that?
We did it the pretty much the easy way. We sold our house in Nashville furnished and moved nothing down other than our clothes, personal items, photo albums, keepsake things. My husband at the time got a condo in Los Angeles, and that's where he had his home base, and so he moved some things there. So we didn't do the big moving truck with furniture and all of that. We did bring a car down, but because my husband still stayed in the States, I mean, he came back and forth quite often, and we called him a pack mule because he was bringing a lot of things back and forth for us. But we also went to visit him during school holidays. We went to visit family, so we went back and forth enough to where we didn't have to get a long-term visa. In Mexico, it's pretty easy. You just, have to cross the border, and then you can turn right back around if you need to. So we just did it that way. But how about you? I think you did the whole move.
Yeah, we kind of did the whole thing. We know, Jody and I both know a lot of people that have lived there for decades, literally decades, solely on tourist visas. They travel enough. And in Mexico, you typically can get 180 days as a tourist. Sometimes when you fly in, they only give you 30 days, but if you just ask them, do you want 180 days? They'll do it. So if you come and go just a couple times a year, it's easy enough for people to live on tourist visas. Now, we wanted to bring a lot of our household goods, and that's not possible. Well, you could do that as a tourist, but then you're taking the chance that you're going to get slapped with an import duty. So because of that, because we wanted to get the import tax duty free exemption, we then got long-term residency, which was good for a year. That gave us a window. I forgot exactly what it was, maybe 6 months or so. There was a time window. We had to bring our goods down to meet the tax exclusion, and we did that. And that was a challenge, but it all worked out. Everything made it down. It just wasn't necessarily the easy way to do it, but that is a way to do it, especially if you're really committed to doing so. So we would definitely suggest that for people. There are some advantages to long-term residency. The time you compile there can then lead to permanent residency. That's not the only way to get permanent residency, but that is a good way to do that. And eventually citizenship, as Jody said, you can bring a car in, but your car has to be permitted at the border, and it has pretty much the same time limit that you would have as a tourist. But if you're a long-term resident, once you import your car, you can then extend that permit tied to your residency without having to cross the border every 6 months. So there's some conveniences and some other benefits to that. So we kind of made the leap that way, Jody.
Yeah, but it's important that you learn those visa requirements.
Very much so.
That's one of my takeaways too, is just know what your time limits are. If you're going to do the tourist visa in Mexico, it's 180 days. If you've crossed the border, you hang on to your paperwork when you do flying or crossing the border, and just pay attention to that. But it isn't a hard process to do the residential visas as well in Mexico. So it just kind of whatever works for you, but just kind of know what needs to be done.
Yes, that's important to learn that process in advance. Make sure you get all the documents in advance. Again, it's straightforward, but there can be a lot of work to gather all the documents and get things arranged and so forth to meet all those requirements. So, yes.
So, Larry, what was the best part of your expat experience in Mexico?
I think in the long run, it was just living a life that meant more to me, living a life that I felt was like more on my terms, living a life that I felt was more independent, living a life according to my own values. So those things that initially attracted us were continually there every day. The climate was great. The people were great. You walk out of your door and you run into people that you like. And we've talked about this before, Jody, that living in Mexico, especially a place like San Miguel as an expat, which has a very large expat community, you sort of are amongst your own tribe. It's easier to make friends faster. You develop important relationships faster. So I just found daily there were reinforcements for the reasons that I wanted to be there. It just being there made me feel good. The people I met made me feel good. Seeing all the wonderful houses and the color, the food, and so forth. All of those things were very reinforcing. To me, those were the best things about being an expat. It was very rewarding. I've now lived other places besides Mexico, but it's a similar thing. Is I'm living where I want to for my reasons on my terms. I'm not living according to somebody else's value or somebody else's idea of a lifestyle. So that's very important to me. How about you?
It was the best, I think the best time of my life, really living in Mexico, with raising my children there. I loved the pace of life. It really was muy tranquilo. It slowed down, and you took the time, to stop and smell the roses, I guess is what you say. But like you said, you walk out your door, walking to a coffee shop in the morning, and it takes a while because you stop and say hello to your neighbors along the way, or you see people in the street, and that's important part of that life, that lifestyle, and I embraced it, and I loved that. I loved learning another language, another culture. I love offering that to my children, which I feel like open their heart, their mind to new ways of doing things, which is, another one of my takeaways. It's when you go live in another country, there you're going to see that they do have different ways of doing things. And instead of saying, oh, our way is better, you're just opening up your mind to those possibilities, those ways of doing things that work. They're just different. It allows you to feel like you're a part of that community, and then you can embrace that life, and instead of having a pushback against it. And and for me, it was very enriching. I loved it.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is that sort of pace can actually bring challenges with it as well. So it is important to kind of get into the rhythm and understand the local customs, but things may not happen as quickly as you want. When we moved our stuff, it got hung up at the border for a couple of weeks. There are people value things in their lives, and they're not maybe as go as they are in some other sort of countries. And so you have to, I don't want to say tolerate that, but it's just like you said, there are different ways of doing things. They may be very valid, and part of it is cultural, and you just have to sort of get used to that. Another big challenge is, clearly, if you're living in a place that is not your native language, there can be challenges with speaking the native language. And if I would just suggest, someone needs to be at least willing enough to learn some basics of the local language. I was researching this the other day. There's an international grading standard for the degrees of fluency in foreign languages. And I guess I would sort of rate myself around what's called B1. That's essentially knowing enough of the language to be able to conduct your day-to-day activities. You can go and ask for things in the grocery store. You can deal with things at the bank. You can deal with a merchant or a repair person or whatever like that. It's still a bit challenging to me to have a long, fluent conversation with someone. But you don't have to be totally conversant in the language to get along. But there is a learning curve there. And so we would certainly encourage people to at least learn something of the language. I've known some people, and you probably have known some too, that sort of expected the locals to speak the language that people brought with them. And so in San Miguel, that's actually a place where a lot of the locals do speak English, which makes it a little easier, that's a first step for an expat. But you just can't expect those people to speak English. And if that's going to frustrate you, well, that may be a challenge that is just going to be too hard for people to overcome. So just go into life like that with your eyes open, knowing that there may be some cultural differences and some things that you may have to kind of get used to.
And what was the hardest part of becoming an expat for you?
Certain things that we probably got so used to as consumers, especially coming from the United States. It's just so easy to get things. So there may be a few favorite foods, a few specialty items that you just couldn't get as readily. And you talked about your husband being the pack mule. We also kind of had that reference. We would have friends that might go back and forth occasionally, and you're always asking, oh, do you mind picking this up for me, bringing this back? I think also, it does put distance between your friends back home. It puts some distance between you and your relatives back home. And so you need to make an effort, I think, to make those connections. but at the same time, I was just thinking this the other day, Jody. I have a relative. I really looked up to him. He would talk about some of his foreign travels and would show me photographs and just what a great time he had. And he wanted to travel more, but he felt kind of trapped because he was under a lot of pressure from his family to stay home. And I understand why he made that decision, but then he's no longer with us and he just never experienced. I just saw the energy and just he would light up when he was talking about these places. And he would so much like to spend more time and live there, and he never did. And I just swore I'm not going to do that, So there are some challenges. You may have to do without some things that are special to you. You may have to make more of an effort to travel to keep your family relationships going. So that can be a hard thing, but to me, it's very well worth it. The benefits I get versus what I have to put in to maintain that. Absolutely. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Well, for me, well, learning the language was hard for me compared to my children. They, like you said, they were little sponges, and I couldn't believe how much, how much they learned, how quickly they learned while I was, practicing verb conjugations with flashcards. So that was a challenge, but some people learn languages easier. But I do know that when people move to a foreign country, in Mexico, there are a lot of places in Mexico that have big expat communities. So if you're in one of those communities, definitely look to be engaged in community activities, and then that can help avoid isolation and loneliness when you first move, and you think, I've left all my friends, I've left my family, what have I done? But that you're going to find so many other like-minded people, because you'll be a part of that tribe. You'll be a part of those people who have that sense of adventure and are looking, to just literally expand their horizons and engaging in whatever activities you're interested in expat communities in Mexico. There's in San Miguel, there was all kinds of things, to be involved in, from the arts to sports to, literary events, to all kinds of things. So that can really help when you're first experiencing that, challenge of a move and not being able to, see all your old friends and family as often.
I think that's an important point for a couple of reasons. One is, I meet people that may be single that would love to do it, but they just don't feel like there would be enough there. And I would strongly urge them to at least go down for a while to try it out, whether it's San Miguel or some other place. But you've raised a good point here, Jody, which is that expat community, especially in San Miguel, is very active. They're very welcoming. I think more so than you would find just in an average place in the U.S., for example. So it's really easy to be involved. People are very accepting there. And so I do think that's an important aspect of being very successful, but I think it's easier to do. And you're right, some people struggle with that a bit, but I think it's easier to avoid some of the downside to that isolation and whatever in a place like that. I think that's very important.
Well, Glenn, do you want to go over your 5 takeaways for moving to Mexico, just to let people know what those are so they can take note?
Yeah, good idea. We'll summarize these very quickly. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for a couple of questions here. But let's knock mine off and we'll do yours, and then we'll see how much time we've got left here, Jody. So of my 5 takeaways, the first of those is try before you buy. Again, living in as an expat, there may be different rules for buying real estate, for example. You may not learn the full nature of a neighborhood until you stay there for a while. You may not understand if there's enough for you from a recreation standpoint. Maybe a neighborhood seems convenient, but after a while living there, you really wished you were either more in walking distance or closer to something else that you're interested into. So we would strongly suggest trying before you buy. It's a great idea to rent someplace for at least 6 months. There may be a strong urge to leap and buy something, but I think a lot of people would avoid mistakes by doing that. I've done that one time in the past. Bought a little too fast and didn't fully realize certain aspects of it. And so I think that's a really important thing to do. Number 2, make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. Again, we're all about making your life better, living life on your terms. And I think that's we just can't support that enough for people to be able to live a better life and to live according to their values. But make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, not because you're trying to escape something. Now, clearly in places like the US, there's a lot of political and cultural turmoil. And I'm happy that I got a farther distance away from all of that. So yes, there may be some other reasons that you're moving for that, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Know that there will be challenges. The pace may be different. The cultural attributes, the way people live their lives, it just may be a little more challenging to get things done. It may be more challenging to get things that you need. But to me, those challenges are far outweighed by the benefits and just the greater sense of independence and fulfillment that I get living as an expat. Number 4 for me is learning a little bit of the language goes a long way. Part of that is even if you're not conversationally fluent, if you are making a genuine effort to learn and communicate in the native language, that will go a long way towards being accepted and people really working with you. So even if languages aren't your thing, just learning a little bit, some keywords can go a long way. And then number 5, just embrace the change of pace. Jody, you talked about things being at a more relaxed pace. Sometimes people that are really ambitious and moving quickly, it can take a while to slow down. But I think the benefits of slowing down, really getting in the rhythm of a place that kind of values the little things, that has traditions. I think there's a big benefit to that. I think it really, I think it can extend people's lives. I think it makes people happier. I think it starts giving them more time to be physically active and living a healthier lifestyle. I think that's one of the benefits that a lot of expats get. So that's my list of the 5 takeaways. And what about yours, Jody?
Well, number 1, if you're moving with kids, do so when they're young, if you can. If you're thinking about it and you're even thinking about having a family, start putting that plan together if you'd like to do that, because it really benefits the kids to learn a language younger. It's easier, I think, to move with a younger family. Not that you can't do it if they're older, but that's a recommendation if you can do that. And the number 2 would be learn about visa requirements, just so you know your guidelines, you know your limits. If you're gonna stay on a tourist visa, you know when you have to get across that border to get it stamped again, or if you want to do a longer term visa, knowing the requirements that you have to do for that. Number 3, if you can visit ahead of time, I would strongly recommend it. Wherever you want to go, just, spending a little bit of time getting to know your neighborhoods. If you're doing schools, getting to know the schools, just getting a sense of place will, allow you to make better decisions if you decide to buy, or, even rent long-term. So visit ahead of time. And number 4, avoid isolation and loneliness by engaging with community activities. Always, I think in a move, you can probably go through a little bit of, I'm alone if you've moved alone, but even if it's your family, you've left your friends, you've left other family, and that can feel very isolating. But especially in expat communities in Mexico, that you're going to find your people there, and especially by reaching out and engaging in activities that are going on. And then number 5, open your mind and your heart to new ways of doing things, because you're going to find that they'll be doing things differently. And instead of bucking the system, if you go along with it, it just kind of, you let go of the old way of thinking, and accept the new way that you have to say it's not necessarily better, it's different, and it still works.
I
Those
think
are my
those are
thoughts.
good takeaways, Jody. Just one thing I want to reinforce on your
Mhm.
4th point about isolation. I think I would consider myself an introvert. I'm not someone who's just naturally social, but I've never been in a circumstance more than in that expat community, say in San Miguel, where it was easier to be social without feeling the pressure that an introvert sometimes says. It was just so easy to avoid what you're talking about. So I think that's a great thing there. I thought that was a really important point to make. All right.
Well, it looks like we have a couple of questions, and we have just a few minutes if we want to answer those.
Yeah, let's pick a couple of these.
Okay. Looks, one here is it safe living in Mexico? I got that question a lot, and my answer is yes. It was a very safe place to live and to raise my children. Of course, I didn't take, risks where I wouldn't take risks anywhere where I've lived, walking late at night through a park by myself or something. I didn't do that. But Mexico does have a reputation, and there are places like along the border in certain parts of Mexico that are definitely more dangerous. But where we chose to live, I felt like it was a very safe place, and children are revered in Mexico. I felt like all my neighbors watched just as much as I did, where them walking to school. I felt like they were very protected there, and it felt like a safe place to raise them. And I just I didn't, I never worried about being caught up in a cartel battle or whatever. People that it's like hearing about Al Capone's Chicago, and thinking that's what all of Chicago was like, or still is, or whatever. It's a bit of a myth that all of Mexico. Well, it is a myth that all of Mexico is not safe, because there are definitely places that are safe, and I felt very safe living there.
Right. There are a lot of places in the U.S. that you don't want to spend time that can be very dangerous. So, yes, I do think if someone is considering living in Mexico, there are some areas you want to avoid. Do your research in advance. But I agree with you, especially just like we went there with young children to really give them the benefits of the language and learning another culture and so forth. Jody's absolutely right. Children are absolutely revered there. They're very safe. The culture really values them, and there's no serial child abusers and whatever. If somebody like that comes up, they're gone. They just it's a very different culture in terms of how children are valued. So I gave my children more freedoms there than I would have if I still lived in a suburban area in the U.S. And there were no problems. Like you said, you always need to be careful in certain ways. There's just a common sense aspect to that too. But if you're the established expat communities, I think you're safe. And even with a lot of the problems that do exist in certain areas of Mexico, Mexico is still one of the absolute top expat destinations for Americans in particular. That's not slowing down. So I think the general answer is safe. Pick the right spot. It's very safe, especially with kids there. Feel very comfortable doing that there as well. So let's see. I think we have time for one more.
Yes. So there's another question. What did you do about healthcare in Mexico, and what were your costs? You want to answer that, Glenn?
Sure. Healthcare in Mexico. So Mexican healthcare, high quality, low cost, very caring. I haven't lived in Mexico for several years, but I do go back generally once a year to visit family and friends. My personal physician is still there. My annual physical, I do it in Mexico. I pay out of pocket. When you go visit the doctor takes as much time as necessary to talk to you. It's not this 7 minutes in, 7 minutes out, trying to process people through. So they really take time. I would say, in terms of what my experience has been in terms of cost of doctors, tests, things like ultrasounds, imaging, blood tests, especially. I have a very comprehensive annual blood test. Whole thing's maybe $100, including the doctor visit and the tests. So I think probably back of the envelope, Jody, the costs are maybe 10% of what you'd be paying somewhere else. It was also a relief to no longer be a U.S. resident, to be able to access global healthcare coverage that would not cover you if you were a U.S. resident. That did allow emergency care if necessary on trips to the U.S. There was just the policies that we had a time limit on how much time you could spend in the U.S. to not void them. But I would say the cost of insurance there, maybe 20 to 30% of what it was. Costs were going up globally, but it was so much less expensive to have adequate healthcare coverage. And then most of the time you're just paying out of pocket, unless you really had a big event and needed to have insurance coverage. Most of the time it was just more economical to pay out of pocket, and the care is really good. When I was there, Jody, just not too long ago, some of my friends are talking about a brand new medical facility that is maybe 45 minutes from San Miguel. And they said the place, it's like science fiction. It's like a spaceship. They said it is just so specialized and impressive. So I was very comfortable with the healthcare thing. And I know you had some experiences too.
Yeah, we did have one experience where my young son cut his chin. He was pushed into a pool, and he reached back and he cut his chin open. And we went to the emergency room. We called ahead of time. I remember we were pretty new there. My friend she handed me a wad of pesos going, here's all different colors, hopefully this will cover it. And we got there, and the nurses had come outside. They were waiting for us.
Wow.
And the taxi came in. They spoke, of course, way better English than we spoke Spanish. They let me sit with Wyatt while they that was my son. That's my son. They put that cone, so he wouldn't have to see. And they offered, if we wanted a plastic surgeon, but it was it was under here, so didn't feel like it was on the where it would be seen, and it wasn't. He needed antibiotics. They went and got them for me at the pharmacy and brought it. And then when I went to check out, I was like, do you take the insurance. They just went, no, you just need to pay. And our total cost was $35.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was, it was an early experience. And then it also just made me realize. And another point is dental work. We've had a lot of dental work. We had orthodontal work, all of it great and inexpensive compared to the United States.
Yeah. So that was a real benefit. We didn't move there for that reason, but that was a very welcome benefit from life there. And like I said, I still go back there for certain aspects of routine medical care. So I think expats people that are thinking about becoming expats would really find that to be a real benefit. If
you're interested in living in Mexico or somewhere else in the world, go to our website, sxexpats.com, and join our mailing list. And check out the variety of digital products and services we offer that are informative and actionable, with the specific steps on how you too can live your best life. And make sure you like this video and follow us.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. It's our mission to help you live life on your terms.